Mike Teke is an incredible business leader. He's just recently brought out a book called The Future of Leadership is Collegiality, something which we're going to unpack a little bit in this discussion. But he has an incredible background, which he'll tell us a little bit about himself. I'm interested that he started off as a teacher and has been working in some of the most high-profile and most interesting business sectors in South Africa, including Optimum Coal Holdings, where he was CEO, also the chairperson and controlling shareholder in the Masimong Group, Anchor, which is apparently doing exceedingly well, and many other interesting places, including the Richards Bay Coal Terminal, and past president of the Minerals Council of South Africa. Also is a non-executive director of ARB, Halewood, and Mouton Citrus, but he's also just ended his term as the chairperson of the Council of the University of Johannesburg. So an absolutely fascinating CV this man has. It's a great pleasure, Mike, to have you on the show with us, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So we've already started a conversation, which I should never do when I have a guest, because there are now a million things bobbing around in my head. But we will start at the beginning. So tell us a little bit about your background, because for people who don't know you, and you're not the kind of person who loves publicity, but you've done all these amazing things. Tell us where it all started.
So it all started in Kwatema. I come from a township called Kwatema, and I was raised there by my grandmother, staying with several cousins and my sister and my two brothers. And then I matriculated and went to the University of the North. Before that, I worked for a year in Springs at a company called Van Leer as a laborer. And I enjoyed that. I was raising money to go to university. And then I completed my studies at the University of the North. I was a teacher for a year at Kenneth Masekela High School, where I matriculated actually. And thereafter, I joined Unilever, Bayer, the German multinational, BHP Billiton, Impala Platinum, then Optimum Coal.
Sure.
And when we listed Optimum Coal, I then came across quite a number of people who were interested in what we were building. And Glencore, the global multinational mining house, bought Optimum. And I decided that I'm going to build more bigger things. And that's when we started working on building what we call Seriti, Masimong, and the other businesses that we work on today. Yeah.
But I also believe that you've left out that you were in a soccer team where Muzi Kuzwayo was the manager.
And Muzi Kuzwayo was the manager of a club called Left and Right at university. And I played in that soccer team, and it was well administered and managed. And there were quite a number of people. And I think some of them who will listen to this one day, they know that they were rooting for me that one day I will play professional football.
Apparently you were very good.
They thought so. And my sister Maria didn't want to hear that. My sister wanted me to complete my schooling, finish school, and make sure that I have a profession or something to do. She didn't see soccer as a profession or something that would make me a living. And I decided to abandon it. I think I was 25, 26. I still play.
But there's still, apparently there's a video floating around on the internet, which many people have seen, of you kicking a ball around, and you still have the talent.
I still play. I still exercise every day. And during COVID, I felt that when we were at times getting bored, Saturday, Sunday, or during the week, when I came back from the office or from the mines, then I would change and dress in my soccer gear and play soccer with myself alone. And my son would join me at some stage. But I still enjoy it, yes.
And I believe there's also a very important person in your life, your grandmother, who had a profound influence on you. And perhaps, when we get into the book a bit later, it will become clearer. But tell me about her. My
grandmother, when I was born, obviously there were no clinics, no hospitals, I'm told. So I was born at home, number 9 Malaza Street in Kotema. And I think she became the midwife or the gynae at the time. And I was born, and my mother went back to work later. And she left me with my grandmother. So the person I knew as my mother was my grandmother. And she raised me. She used to walk me to school. When I was a little boy, Gareth, I'm sure you can see my complexion. A lot of people get confused that am I colored, am I black? I'm a township black youngster at the time. And during apartheid, we know that those classifications were important. Mm-hmm. So people used to tease me. And it never really bothered me. I went to school, and my grandmother walked with me to school. And we used to have a great conversation with my grandmother walking to school. And she would fetch me in the afternoon. And she still woke me up at 3:45. The fascinating thing about my grandmother is that every kid in the house, my cousins, would sleep during school holidays. In other words, just because they are not going. My grandmother still woke me up specifically and helped me wash, and I would dress up and sit and watch people going to work. So that habit has not gone away. And I look back now and say, what a great grandmother she was, because she left me with those great traits, you know.
I suppose those habits that you learn early in life are the ones that shape the way you'll behave later on.
Precisely.
And you
Precisely.
still
I
wake
still
up.
wake up early. I still irritate people about work and send them WhatsApps and SMSs early in the morning. And when Chilitsi Marwala left South Africa for the United Nations, he gave a great speech. And in his speech, he said he doesn't forget our 6 a.m. catch-up meetings, because I said to him, I don't have time after 8 o'clock. So I'll catch him at 10 to 6 when I arrive at the office. And he enjoyed it.
Well, there's a lesson also for people who are wondering why they're not taking off and being successful, but they're not up until 9.
Sure.
Right. So managing all of this empire that you've built and all these various businesses, obviously there are lots of people who are there as part of your team who manage various things. But for you, it must be a major task to fit everything in. How do you do that?
Well, I have priorities every day that I write down. And often when I go to meetings, I'm very critical of people who walk into meetings empty-handed. That's what I watch. And if people don't write things, I know people have computers, have got cell phones, and they fiddle with their phones. But I don't know what they do with those phones, maybe. But what is important, the discipline of writing something down becomes very important.
Yes.
That's what they say in the classics, you know. So that's the first thing. The second one is I am good at something, and quite a number of people can attest to that. I'm good at being able to say no. There are things that I don't appreciate and that don't appeal to me. Why? Because they don't fit into my day. They don't fit into my priorities. Like now, when I live here, I know where I'm headed. I'm going back to some meeting somewhere, and I'll make sure that that meeting must finish on time. I must tell you a funny story that happened to me yesterday at our executive meeting. Our exco was supposed to start at 8 o'clock yesterday, and I was in another meeting. And at 7:42, everybody, the members of the exco, were sitting in the boardroom waiting for me. And when I walked out of my meeting, I started to ask questions about when are we starting at 8, because everybody must be seated by 7:55, they know. And I walked in, everybody was waiting for me.
I love that.
Because they wanted to see how I was going to react. Time is money.
I love
and
that.
you cannot miss it for anything. So I get really excitable. I no more get angry. As I wrote this book, I've learned that I have learned to be collegial, but it was not me. It was not me. I really get concerned when people joke about time. You know, African time, don't worry, we'll start, I'm here, don't worry, it's better late than never. I just don't, those things don't appeal to me. And I take things seriously. All the businesses we've built within the principles of what I want to see.
Right.
Yeah.
And punctuality is the
Punctuality is the
kings.
politeness of kings, as they
So,
say.
so Mike, let's get to this book of yours, which I found fascinating. I've read it, and there are many things in there that I needed to think about for a long time. It didn't occur to me that they were obvious. So you've put the word collegiality in the title, which I think is important. And you said now you've actually come to that realization yourself. So you weren't always collegial.
No.
What does that word mean to you? Because many people who are listening to this will go, it sounds like something that's sort of like when people talk about colleagues. It's sort of something when people talk about, you know, the academic world. There's a collegial atmosphere where people learn from each other and they're polite to each other. And there are all kinds of niceties. But what does it mean to you?
What it means to me is that when I was raised in the world of business, is that for me life was a zero-sum game. You know, you go into a meeting, you win. I used to come across managers who would say, you go for a kill.
Right.
You know, you fight hard and make sure that you bring this home, you know. So you used to walk into meetings aggressive and fighting and making sure that the next person who's sitting in the room, when they walk out of the meeting, they must feel that they met you, you know, that type of thing. The second one was you noticed people who were promoted and moving up. the ranks, that they were behaving that way, right? And you felt that you wanted to behave like them. But then I realized later in life, and the best one is when I worked in human resources, we used to engage in wage negotiations. For a month, we'll be fighting with each other. And on the 11th hour, either you go on strike or not, you end up becoming collegial all of a sudden, and you sign an agreement and you hug each other and you say, what were we talking about for the past 4 or 5 weeks fighting? I'm sorry, it's like in politics, if you look in the US, when they do the budget stories and the stress of saying, do we raise the budget ceiling, the debt
It's just
ceiling or
happened now.
not? And it happens.
Yeah.
Kevin McCarthy and
Joe
President
Biden.
Biden, they've resolved the issue. But for months, these people have been fighting. So I realized that let's learn to be collegial to resolve the issues that relate to the world. Let's try and cooperate on quite a number of things. And I've noticed in our business now, I'm learning, truth be told, it's hard. I keep quiet. At times there are things I have to say, I want to say, but I don't say them because I'm learning and I believe that it's delivering results. So I felt that let's build on being collegial. And collegial is cooperation and working together. But let's not confuse it with fraternization and ingratiating. You know, there's a person who's sitting next to me here who plays golf. Oh, there are people who play those sports.
Yes.
And they would say, on Saturday, I must go and play with my boss, because probably we become friends and we can start talking about. Those are the things I try to avoid in life. And I'm saying in terms of leadership, watch those things. As you're becoming cooperative, as you collaborate with your team, as you're making sure that everybody works well with you and you work well with them, don't confuse it.
Maintain a professional
Maintain
distance.
a professional distance, but let's collaborate, let's cooperate, but we're not friends.
That's an interesting thing, and I think many people struggle with that distinction. They want to be friends because that's ultimately the conclusion of a good relationship, right?
Yes.
But in business, that's not how it is. You're
not how
both
it is.
working towards the same goal sometimes, but maybe there are personalities that are very different. I mean, just on the concept of collegiality, which you've already explained now, people have different personalities.
Yes.
And the people who are aggressive and push for a result in a meeting and are time conscious and are more of those lions like you are, and I suspect I'm more like that too. We don't like sitting and talking about how someone's kids are or how their day was or what they did for this weekend. We want to get
Yes.
to the meat and the bones, right?
Yes.
But for some people, if you don't do that other stuff, they're not going to be able to deliver anything in that meeting.
So when we started in Seriti, there is an interesting thing that I learned and I appreciate and I embraced it was checking in. So when you start a meeting in Seriti, any meeting, people check in. How are you? How are things going?
Okay.
Because are you ready for the meeting? Are you okay for the meeting? Because you don't know what happened last night. That is why people may be grumpy.
Yeah, someone might have had a car accident, or their wife is sick, or
Precisely. So this checking in thing, truth be told, I bought into it 100%. And
Okay.
as a leader, people must watch you. You can't walk into a room and say, I want everybody to check in except me. So
Right.
I check in and I play that role, and it's critical for me. But in the book, I talk about if you can balance things out, because the leadership is about balancing things out, Gareth. You know, we talk about communication. And you'll ask me a question as a leader, when do I communicate, when I don't I communicate? Well, you need to create that balance, find the balance somewhere. That's why you lead. That's why you're leading. In our lives, we lead and we are able to tell people that if you said to me, let's go and play golf on Saturday or let's go and watch rugby in the afternoon, I am able to say to you, no. But I'm not going to walk and follow you and end up, as they say in America, you're drinking Kool-Aid or you drank Kool-Aid
Right.
because you're subservient, you're obedient. I'm not. You know, I'll tell you, no, I don't do those things. Because I want to create a balance that we collaborate, we cooperate, but
But do people all understand this? Because you're very decisive. You know what you're about. You can say no, which I think is such a powerful weapon to have. And once you've learnt it, you take it for granted, and other people are always impressed by it. But for you, it's just what you do on a daily basis. But do other sometimes work colleagues, sometimes people you meet with at your own level in business, people you're negotiating with, you're the deal maker. I mean, that's clearly from your history in business. You are the guy who makes deals happen.
yes.
Do you ever feel like you compromise those principles or that other people expect you to?
You do compromise at times, but it's the ability to walk away when you have to. And often there is a good story that the best transaction you've ever done in business, it's the one you didn't do.
Wow. Explain that to me.
The one you walked away from, that's the best transaction.
Because you saved yourself
You
what
saved
could
yourself,
have been.
whatever
Right.
you walked away, exactly. So it's the ability. And then comes the issue of friendship. Or you know people, or somebody introduced somebody who's in their family and you're very close to them. And you worried that I'm going to offend these people if I say no. And you keep quiet and you travel the journey with people, misleading them. And on the 11th hour, you realize that something is not working. So it's going to be difficult for you to tell people the bad news after and saying, actually, I was not supposed to be part of this trip.
Sure.
So we've identified businesses in our lives where we sit around the table and say, we love the business, we love the concept. But probably on 55 minutes in an hour, minute 56, we say, you know what, thank you. We're not coming with you. And the person, thinks that 15 minutes ago, 20 minutes ago, I thought I've got a partner here.
Yeah.
So it's the lesson that we need to teach each other.
And honesty seems to be the important part of this.
It's critical.
And so many people in business think that it's about exactly the opposite. It's about ruthless dishonesty and
Yes.
trying to one-up the
Yes.
guy. And
Yes.
that's an old way of thinking.
Yes, it's an old way of thinking. These days, we become collegial, we sit around the table and we share the vision. In my case, I'm able to say my dream with Massimo, the company that we run as a family, I see that business becoming a big business because I look for sizable, big things, and I'm a long game man. If you ask me, do I buy a business? If I commit to a business, it's a long game. It's a long game.
And that needs patience, which is another part of this collegiality, because
Yes.
sometimes building the relationships and forging the deal and also contributing to the vision of someone else's business that you might be buying into.
Yes.
That takes patience.
I'll give an example of Peter Armitage, the CEO of Anchor Capital.
Right.
When Peter sold the story to quite a number of people, including myself, that he sees this building a business with an assets under management or assets under advisory crossing around 150 billion, going to 500 billion. A lot of people probably would have said, you're telling pork pies now, And
Yeah, because it wasn't anywhere near
wasn't
that.
anywhere near that. There was no 100 million or 200 million rand on the table at that time. And if you look at the journey that we've traveled, we are into our 10th year. This business has crossed 100 billion, and you start to say, now this man is believable,
Right.
I stood behind him. But truth be told is you love the personality, you love the work ethic, and you believe the story. And beyond that, for me, it's a story of something big, something great. And I'm a long game guy. I've never gone to Peter and say, I want to sell today, I want to exit. I've always said to Peter, I'm in this thing for a long, long haul. And all the businesses I've invested in, people who work with us in those businesses, it's families. Some of them are individuals I trust implicitly. And those are the people I'm going to travel this journey until I'm like Charlie Munger at 99.
Right. He's the guy famously who Warren Buffett
Exactly.
has as a partner who nobody knows about, right?
Exactly.
He's quiet and gets things done.
Just get
and
things
makes
done.
some very good investment decisions.
Exactly.
Do we have enough people who think long term like you in a country like South Africa? Because I'm concerned that so many people are thinking about survival and they're thinking about tomorrow, but maybe not very much further than tomorrow.
I am coming across young people, very young people, and when I say young people, between the age of 25 and 40. Some of them have started their careers. Some of them are starting. Some of them want to live corporate careers. And there's nothing wrong with a corporate career, by the way. They just want to start their own thing. And those are the people I'm handpicking now. And if you follow the old, classical story of one starfish at a time, I've identified quite a number of those young people who are keen on building something, and they understand that the journey is going to take quite a few steps. I've come across those. And I do come across young people who are bright, who are smart, who will tell you that they want it now, instant gratification. And I always am able to tell people that I can't make instant coffee, This thing must brew over a period of time. So they are doing fantastic work, and I've come across quite a number of them. Yeah.
What are the chief characteristics of those people who you find you want to work with? You said good work ethic just now.
Number one, it's a great work ethic.
And you said they've got a personality.
Number two, they've got this personality that says, I can do this. Number three is you don't pick up a feeling amongst them that tells you that you're irritating them when you scream at them. And I do scream at them, and then it contrary
It's
to
not
my
very
collegial.
collegial.
It's not very collegial, but it's when a father speaks to the son or to a
Right.
daughter, and I'm able to say to them, I want you to do ABC, and those are the people who are driven by goals. But the most important thing I've come across with some of them, and not all of them, you come across guys who've got this strong intellectual horsepower. They are smart intellectually, whatever they are into. If he's an engineer, she's an engineer, I've found that they understand the principles of that field. I'm not an engineer, but I spend time trying to understand the business of coal.
You have to.
I tried. And I've got people who are born with that. They went to university, they've got engineering degrees, and those are young people. I won't mention names, but I'm proud to sit with them and they tell me what they are doing. And some of them make so much money that if I say, what are you going to do with this money? They tell you, I'm looking for a home for this money. Where can we invest it? They are not saying, can I buy a car?
Right.
No, they are saying, can I find a home? Why? Because I've instilled this growth mentality as in big things, sizable things.
But that's a curious thing. The desire to know more.
Yes.
The desire to want to understand. And you said you're not an engineer. You didn't study coal.
No.
Or the chemistry of combustion or any of that stuff. But you know an enormous amount about that because you want to understand the detail of your business.
Precisely. And I spend time with managers. Fortunately, in my career, I worked for bosses who never made life difficult for me. I might have come across one or two, but the great managers, there's a gentleman called Eddie Scholz. He's in Florida now. He left the country. He's old, he's retired, but he's the man who spent time with me and taught me those years what coal was all about. And that is why I can be able to spend time and advise other people who are coming into our business, who are part of the business. And the other businesses that we buy into as well, I have to learn and understand. The businesses we bought into have made us a diversified business. And Gareth, I have to make sure that I understand each one of those businesses.
Okay, so to go back to collegiality for a second, there are certain do not things there. So you don't scream at people,
Yes.
although sometimes none of us can help that, right? Sometimes it's just when you're frustrated, you're going to. The less you do it, obviously, the better. But there are these people who are constantly aggressive, and it does seem to me that they generally get their way most of the time, because most people are just so horrified at this behavior that they roll over and let these people get away with it. Whether it works in the long term or not is a separate issue, right?
So I say you can scream at people and enjoy screaming at people, but you're destroying other lives. It's something that we never learned when we were young. We used to say, just destroy this person and make sure that you belittle them and you make sure that you're strong. But it doesn't work well that way. The second one, it impacts on your own health.
Yeah.
You can scream at people, but when you close the door in your office, probably you get your own chest pains, right?
Definitely.
And your sugar levels or your high blood pressure levels become.
And you don't want to be there.
And you don't want to be there. And
you
probably
feel horrible.
you're not the kind of person who eat well, you don't exercise and the like, and you feel bad on your own physically. But you still continue with that habit. And I'm saying, what then happens when you're 60? Because you were screaming throughout your career and throwing things at people and
early heart attacks and all kinds of things.
So I've watched that. That is why I talk about your health issues as well have become important.
So a lot of my observation of South African business, if we can look at leadership in this country, South African business leadership in this country, there are a lot of people who are very good managers, but they're not necessarily leaders.
Yes.
And sometimes those people end up at the top of a company just because they've been there for a very long time. And the leaders have become frustrated and left, and they leave it in the hands of managers.
Sure.
And so the company manages to do a reasonably good job,
Yes.
but they're not growing,
Yes.
and they're not necessarily shooting the lights out.
Yes.
And it's okay for the managers to acknowledge that they're managers, but very often they call themselves leaders. Do you distinguish between the two?
Yes, I have been able to distinguish. There are people who manage businesses very well, and they manage, the paperwork is done, the governance is done, everything is done up to the last T. All of the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed properly, and they're managing. But to lead, in other words, to one, inspire growth amongst individuals within the business so that people can grow and aspire for big things. Two, if I said to you as a manager, I want you to look at growing this business, probably you worry about revenue streams and the like, instead of saying, what can we acquire? What are the new markets? Where can we go to make this business big? You know, if anybody were to look at Tim Cook when he took over from Steve Jobs, and today where you're seeing Apple, a $3 trillion business now, you look back and say, this guy was not a manager. He saw the future. He understands the direction that this is taking. You look at a company called NVIDIA today. That business, the person who looks at that business today and say, the journey that's being traveled, it's not only managerial. And I'm not looking down upon people who are managers.
Sure.
But as a manager, you need to be aware of there are leadership things.
But is that in the result? Because Tim Cook, who you reference now, when I saw him take over from Steve Jobs, I think a lot of people, including me, probably underestimated him and did think he was a manager.
We thought this guy comes from supply chain and logistics. He
Operations,
understood the operations and the like. He wants
Very
the
competent.
truck must arrive on time. The boxes must be inside the truck and delivered to the customer.
Whereas Steve Jobs was this
he was a
aesthetic
visionary,
designer, creator.
Precisely. Same applies with what you see with a person like Elon Musk. You know, he sees the future. He sees that 20 years' time, in 20 years' time, things could be different. That's what leadership is all about. People walk in the corridors and they would ask you a deeply fundamental question. Should I get married? Should I have the second or the third child? Should I buy a car? Is my life going to be better tomorrow because of you as a leader? They don't tell you, but it's in their eyes, right? And you must inspire that confidence. But people who are not sure what's happening in an organization, those are the people who get their CVs out and they're looking somewhere. And they get disappointed when they go to the next company, they meet the same guy. They look the same, these people, you know. But if you're a leader, it's a lesson I taught myself that try and talk to people. But, Gareth, you won't satisfy everybody, right? There are people who are Rolling Stones, you know.
Yeah. And when do you know it's time to end a business relationship? That's for some people, that's the toughest one. Is things are going well, it's comfortable, you know, they're making money, there's success, but it's not phenomenal success. It's not the kind of thing that inspires people.
Yeah, I've come across clever CEO or smart CEOs, let me put it that way, who know that it's time for them to move on. And they're smart enough to say, I'm handing the baton to somebody to grow this business. You know, the person who wrote the foreword to this book was the CEO of BHP Billiton globally, Marius Lopez. He knew that his tenure was this much, and he identified his successors. He knew that at some stage he will hand over. And those are the people who know that, one, my capacity and my capabilities will go this far, and my interest. But then there are other CEOs who are saying, I want to travel this journey for a long, long time. And I won't mention names. There are quite a number in South Africa who are great CEOs. Sure. They continue to seek opportunities for growth.
So it's really up to you.
It's really up to you.
If you want to keep growing things, but when you see you can't grow things anymore, it is time to move on.
Exactly. Let me give an example of Sibanye.
Neil Froneman.
Neil Froneman took Sibanye. He took Anglo Platinum assets. He bought Lonmin. And we kept on watching.
At a time where everybody else was saying, don't.
Everybody was saying, run for the hills, right?
Yeah.
And
Mining,
he said, I'm going to
margins,
the US,
getting more expensive.
Stillwater.
Right,
and he went to buy the lithium business, and now he's in Australia. He's continuing to grow. Has anybody ever asked him, Neil, where does it stop? No, because he has a visionary, he has a leader who sees the future. But there could be other CEOs who are saying, you know, it's time up now, I'm 65. I need to move on, and somebody young must come and take over.
Do you ever feel those pressures?
Myself? No. I'd love to build things. I still have a great future ahead. I've worked with people who, I've got my CFO who's worked with me as a partner, as a colleague. Doug Gain has been with me for 18 years now.
Wow.
He understands the vision. He understands the journey. He shares the vision that, one, we need to build something big and sizable. Two, he's still enjoying the journey himself, hopefully, and I believe he is. So I'm not one to be saying I want to move on.
No, I'm very relieved because we need people like you who think big and think of the future. And we'll get to your feelings about what may be in the future for this country. And
Sure.
I know you're an optimist, and I'm very
Sure.
happy to hear that, because we need all the optimism we can get at the moment. You know, people respond to leadership, and you just said it yourself. They need to know that there's something good's coming.
Yes.
And perhaps that's where our politicians miss the beat. But do you ever feel that there's a report card, that you're in competition with anyone but yourself? That you look at the balance sheet and go, how am I doing with respect to Anil Fruneman or someone else?
I tend not to look at it from an envious point of view. I don't envy people's material things, as an example. I'm not interested in somebody driving a big car that can
So if someone
speak.
says, oh, well, you know, Mike Teke is worth X amount, you don't know what that
No,
number
I don't
is.
care.
You've
about,
never,
honestly, I
never
don't.
bothered to do
no,
a calculation.
I never bothered about that. I don't. What I worry about every day is that how do we make this country massive, stable, and strong? What I mean by that is, I was in Singapore 3 weeks ago, and as I walk around the streets of Singapore, and I'm saying, I'd love to see this in my country.
Yes.
I'd love to see this in South Africa. What I mean by that, the roads are clean. This is different. And I say, this is what I want for South Africa. And I'm an
Yes.
optimist. I don't want people to leave this country. This is a great country, guys. Singapore doesn't have a mining. They don't have resources. On
No,
it.
it's
in
a
fact,
tiny,
they're worried
tiny
about
space.
land, right?
Yeah, they don't have
With
enough
us,
land.
we have the land, we have the resources, we have the people, we have the agriculture. We can compete with anybody. In fact, we can be the powerhouse amongst these 54 African countries. And I think we're punching below our weight.
But maybe this is why your book is so timely.
Yes.
Because what we need is people who can make that happen.
Precisely. But then, beyond that, in every calamity, there's an opportunity, right? When we see all these worrying trends that I looked at the rand the other day, and I was comparing the rand and spot and what has happened to our currency. And I'm saying we shouldn't be seeing that. Why? Because we have the capabilities as a country. And I would love, Muzi knows I grew up in a township in Guatemala. I'd love one day to talk to people who, I'm talking about not voters, I'm not a politician, please. I'm talking about citizens like me, to talk about citizenship issues. How do we make this country a great country? You know, you see tourists who want to come to South Africa to see something called the Big Five. Who's got the Big Five somewhere out there? And I'm optimistic that I am going to continue building powerful businesses. And I'm going to, I don't create jobs. I try to make life better for people.
Where can we all start doing that? Where can the average South African, someone who's running a little business of their own, who's inspired by what you've already said, because I have no doubt that this is going to be inspiring to people, where do they start and how do they pick up the pace and what difference can they make?
Firstly, it's the man in the mirror. Talk to that man first, you know, because most of us are good at saying the guy next door is the one who's causing me problems.
Or who's going to save me?
Oh, he's going to save me, right? So let's talk to the guy in the mirror first. The second one is play to your strength. You know, I find some of the people, we're looking for a lot of things. There are things I'm not capable of doing, right? If you said to me, would I be able to drive a Formula One car?
Or even basically fix your plumbing.
Can I do plumbing? No.
No, neither
In
can I.
fact,
Yeah.
my wife knows very well that when it comes to things like plumbing, electrical work, and the like, I am going to cause problems. Right? She says to me, "This thing doesn't
Don't
work."
try and
but
fix it
Don't
yourself.
try and fix it. You're good at phoning people. Phone
Right.
somebody.
Yeah.
So those are the things that we need to look at ourselves and say we're not capable of this. But these ones, I'm good. Play to your strength. The third one is, I think we need to respect that this country has got values, right? Let's bring back those old school values.
Okay, so let's talk about the values, because you also address some of these in the book.
Yes.
So what do you think are the good values that will get us back on track?
I'd love time is of the essence in anything. When I drive in a township, any township, and I'd love to see kids going to school right early on time. early. Chilizi Marwala told me a story that in Japan, and I still have to verify that, kids are not driven to school by their parents, must walk to school. It's things like those. But I know that we have infrastructure issues and the like. Secondly, we need to start respecting things like what we own as a country. There are things that belong to us as citizens. The roads belong to us.
Yes.
We pay tax and
Yes.
they must be clean. The amenities that we get, going to a public hospital. I'd love people to say, I can compete with medical aids or private hospitals. I'll go to a public hospital because that hospital services me the same way as a private hospital. So
we've got the laws that make these things.
We've got the laws that
to belong
make
to
those
us.
things.
We talk about human dignity, but the way most people are living, and part of it is the first thing you said, values. The man in the mirror, personal accountability.
Absolutely.
So we've got to be accountable for our own space. But then beyond that, there is a responsibility where I think people have forgotten that we own these things collectively. These don't belong to the government.
They belong to all of us.
When someone chops down a streetlight for scrap metal, which you see all over the place now, it drives me mad. I'm thinking, you don't realize that's part of what you own that you're destroying.
But truth be told is that we're not creating those opportunities for a better life. Not creating, I didn't say job opportunities. I'm talking about opportunities for people to have a better life. I have young entrepreneurs, small businesses growing, inspiring those young people to wake up in the morning and take advantage of opportunities. There are opportunities out there, but we need to open those doors and start helping young people.
And you have mentioned your wife and your children, and I think family values are an important part of this too.
Yes.
Because it all starts there, right?
Yes.
It's like, just get the basics right. I think a lot of people struggle, and they're thinking about how they can make a difference in the future, what the survival stuff that we spoke about right at the beginning. But like, these basic family values are also important. You mentioned your grandmother.
Gareth, there's a comment I make to people that when I was growing up building businesses, my wife used to drive my kids to school. And I learned something that I never did that. I did it probably once or twice just to help her there and there. But it was never part of my routine. Every day I had to be in the office at 5:36 and push. And years later, I was awarded what they call the Brigadier Stokes Memorial Award in the mining industry in 2018. And I reflected on this and I said, yes, I've got this beautiful, it's very few people who get such an award. But I never ever bonded with my boy and my girl in a car driving them to school. You take that for granted, right? But it's something that I would have loved to do. And I'd love us to spend time on basic things like those.
But Mike, at the same time, you wouldn't have been able to give them the life that they've had. And maybe it's swings and roundabouts.
Swings and roundabouts.
Right? You can't do everything. You can't be everywhere all the time.
I agree with you. You catch it in the swings, you lose it in the roundabouts, right? In business, I have said the same story. But when it comes to the private life that you mentioned now in terms of our values, there are things we need to appreciate as human beings. I'd love people to say, I'm coming to live in South Africa. How do I get a passport? I want to get that green passport. I want to be in South African. And where would you be? Probably in Switzerland, in Geneva, as an example. Somebody saying, I want to see the big five every day.
Yeah.
I want to be, there are agriculture opportunities, there are housing opportunities, there's this. I get so depressed when somebody says, how do I leave the country?
Oof.
It worries me.
And we've seen a lot of talent leave the country.
And I want these young, talented people to build this country because there are opportunities.
You need them in your business. I need them in mine.
Absolutely.
We've got to make this place work. So just quickly on the coal front, because there are a lot of people at the moment, our obsession in this country is energy.
Sure.
We know that there is an energy crisis. We know that there's a Minister of Electricity now, who I'm sure you've met in your dealings with,
Yes.
with coal and Eskom and everything else. How do you feel this problem is going to be resolved, and are you hopeful about its resolution?
From a business point of view, I am hopeful that we need to push this journey of having a proper energy mix. Coal will remain base load for a long time. We are coal miners, and people are saying, Mike, why do you invest in renewables? We invest in renewables because we understand the story of fossil fuels and carbonization. And for us, therefore, to decarbonize, not whitewashing anything, we need to diversify, and we identifying opportunities, one. So once we have a proper energy mix, which the journey is there, we need to start telling the population of South Africa properly that this is the journey we're traversing. I don't think quite a number of people would, not because they don't know, it's because we don't talk much about that. Now that we're talking about it.
But just on this, before we even talk about the rest of it, there's also a lot of political toing and froing over renewables, and it's become a very hot topic. I mean, people all over the world, you see climate change protesters, and I think everyone accepts that there are definitely damages human beings are doing to the environment. But we live in a country where we must also be practical.
We are practical.
We don't have what we do have is the resources in terms of coal to be able to create the power that we need to grow the economy so that we can eventually have more renewables.
Yes.
But we can't go put the cart before the horse, right?
Right. That is why I'm saying the 16 coal-fired power stations we have in the country, we need to spend more time in getting them humming, as in burning those units producing a coal.
How did it get to the stage where they're not?
We, as I say to you, we're spending time now. We need, I'm one of those people who wouldn't stand on the sidelines and say, let me criticize Eskom, they are failing. No.
Sure.
I want us to find a solution to these 16 coal-fired power stations. We need to.
Sure.
Secondly, we need to make sure that our nuclear power station, the only one we have in the Cape, Quebec, has got 1,970 megawatts. If we can get that humming, then we push in terms of renewables.
Will we ever get to a stage where we produce surplus energy again?
Yes, we will. One day it will happen, and it won't be long. Sooner we will do it.
This is what people want to hear.
I'd love to see a stage where, as an industrialist, you must remember, Gareth, if we were to put money into any business, when we invest in any business, your biggest cost or expense that sits with you is power. You need electricity.
Sure.
You run a bank, you need electricity. You run a factory, you need electricity.
Well,
you run a butchery.
How many businesses have we seen go under because they couldn't pay the diesel bills?
I believe that we'll reach a stage where there's a surplus. But in that journey, let's make sure that let's not create the gloom to be worse and people don't know what is happening. It's the leadership in me that says I'm an optimist and I'm not a blind optimist.
Sure.
Because I work in the industry.
And you know what's going on there. That's why I'm asking.
I understand what's happening from a technical point of view, from a business point of view, and we can achieve the results.
But I think we need also to know that there's going to be some pain still before we get all these things sorted out. And as long as people know there's something we're working towards, then when we get there, it'll be worth it. Yeah. People don't mind making sacrifices if there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Gareth, I might say something. It might come across a bit controversial.
Go on.
When a lady says to you, "I want a baby," and you're married, they know that labor is painful, right?
Right.
But they want a beautiful baby.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's the same thing.
We're going through that pain right now. The issue for me is I'd love every citizen of this country to know that it's painful at the moment. But we will reach a stage, I believe, where we'll have a surplus. I believe we will have enough electricity. I believe that we'll have reliable and affordable electricity. And every household must have that power.
Right.
And I believe we're heading there. But the journey right now is tough.
Okay, so because we're on the optimist train at the moment, which I love, how do you see South Africa developing and where do you see us going in your best case scenario? Let's sketch a vision that Mike Teke has in his head of what South Africa could look like in 15 years from now.
This is a country that's not landlocked. We've got ports, massive ports. We've got Durban, we've got Richards Bay, we've got East London, across. We've got some countries are landlocked, they have nothing. Firstly, we need to make sure that those ports deliver. Number two, what is the significance of that? The significance of that is that any business that runs in this country that wants to expand its markets and grow. As an example, citrus growers, they want their oranges to reach any markets as soon as possible.
Yes.
We need to work on those things. In our case as a country right now, our state-owned entities must be brought back to life proper. You know, I dream of a time, and that dream is going to be realized, where when I go to London and watch trains, the tube underground, and you watch, I want us to go back to those days.
I sit on the Gautrain occasionally.
Yes.
And I think this is marvelous. This is an
Yes,
example of
but
what
I
can
want
be done.
those things to be done back in the townships because the infrastructure
Yes,
is there.
and Transnet and Prasa, and these things should be
Let's
running.
bring back those things. I spoke about values earlier. Once we sort that one out, we've got leadership, we've got the people who can talk about. The second one is to sort out those things. Those are the things, when state-owned entities get money from the state, if they're owned by the state, they're the ones that create jobs, and create a better life for people. But beyond that, my biggest dream is that will then sort out our education system. By the way, all these things will be done simultaneously.
Yes.
I dream of a country, as I said to you, where education is education. I've invested in education. I love education. Healthcare. I want people, Gareth, to go to any hospital. I don't want people to go to a private hospital and then others have nowhere to go. People must be able to say, I can go to a public hospital because it's the same as a private hospital. So my vision, the coming 15, 20 years, if we can get all those state-owned entities built up, rebuilt aggressively now. 2, we need to worry ourselves about things like, obviously, those ports are part of the state-owned entities.
Sure, of course.
3, encourage young entrepreneurs to take risks and talk about long-term things. Then we'll be able to pay for our education, we'll pay for our healthcare easily because those things are happening. The private sector is strong in South Africa. You know, banks are collapsing all over the place. I'm sure you've read about that. You've had First Republic, you had the Silicon Valley
Bank.
Have you ever had anything in South Africa? These banks are strong. The private sector in South Africa is strong. We must build on that.
And the Rand?
The rand is the current. No. On a serious note,
Because
Gareth,
it's how we
it's
square
the
up.
function of seeing things happening. It's the function of not only somebody made a comment and then the rand went to 20 rand to the dollar. I'm talking about deep fundamental things where us as business in South Africa, let us run the businesses. Let's build these businesses. Not watch us running businesses. Be part of that story. This rand will stabilize at some stage, but at the moment, it's not going to stabilize on paper. We need to get the things I've spoken about right.
There's so much to unpack. I suggest that anyone who is interested in more of what Mike is talking about here takes a look at the book. The Future of Leadership is Collegiality. And I think there are so many lessons in the book. There are so many lessons that you've shared with us today. It's such a pleasure to spend time with you. Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you, Gareth.
Mike Teke, everybody. Fantastic.